The conventional wisdom about birds and gardens runs something like this. Birds eat your fruit, birds eat your seedlings. Birds are a problem to be managed. Backyard bird signals held that view for years. Then a single season of watching what actually happened in the garden changed the entire framework. The reframe isn't birds are harmless. Some birds, in some situations, cause real damage. The comments from gardeners dealing with European starlings stripping entire orchards, or finches decimating pea seedlings, are legitimate and worth taking seriously. The reframe is this: a garden that birds want to live in is a fundamentally different ecosystem than a garden birds merely pass through. And the difference between those two gardens is almost entirely within your control. What birds are actually doing in your garden? Start with the pest control math because it is more compelling than most gardeners realize. A 2016 study in Nature Plants found that bird predation on herbivorous insects reduces plant damage by an average of 14% in agricultural settings, a figure that sounds modest until you consider that it represents the difference between a healthy crop and a failed one in a bad pest year. In home garden settings, where plant density is higher and pest pressure is more concentrated, the effect is likely stronger. The mechanism is straightforward. Insectivorous birds, wrens, chickadees, towhees, nuthatches, are hunting your garden constantly for the same insects that are hunting your plants. Aphids, caterpillars, beetles, fly larvae, hornworms. These are not incidental snacks. They are the primary food source for most of the birds that visit temperate gardens. A pair of black-capped chickadees, feeding a clutch of nestlings, will remove thousands of caterpillars from the surrounding area over the course of a breeding season. The historical lesson from China's 1958 sparrow extermination campaign is worth repeating here, because it illustrates the stakes. At scale, when the sparrows were eliminated, the locusts they had been suppressing exploded. The resulting crop failures contributed to one of the worst famines in recorded history. The sparrows were eating grain. They were also eating the insects that would have eaten everything. Remove the birds, and the insects win. Rethinking the fruit damage problem. The most common complaint about birds in the garden: holes in tomatoes, pecked grapes, damaged figs, almost always has the same underlying cause. And it isn't hunger. Birds peck fruit for water. This is the key insight that changes the entire management approach. A bird that has reliable access to fresh water has almost no motivation to damage fruit. The fruit damage is a signal that the garden is failing to meet a basic need, not evidence that birds are inherently destructive. Backyard bird signals confirmed this through direct observation. After adding 2 water sources to the garden, one near the vegetable beds, one near the fruit trees, fruit damage dropped substantially within a single season. The birds were still present. They were simply no longer thirsty. The water source design matters. Birds are prey animals with strong threat detection instincts, and they will not use a water source that leaves them exposed. Placement near dense plantings, shrubs, tall perennials. Anything that provides a quick escape route is essential. Partial shade keeps the water cooler and more appealing. A moving water element, even a simple drip or solar fountain, is dramatically more attractive to birds than still water. They can detect the sound and movement from considerable distance. The mosquito problem is real and worth addressing directly. Still, water in warm weather becomes a breeding ground within days. A recirculating pump solves this almost entirely. If a pump isn't practical, changing the water every 2 to 3 days achieves the same result. One season of neglecting this produced a mosquito population that took the rest of the summer to bring under control, an experience that makes the maintenance routine feel very worthwhile. The native plant argument. Every experienced bird gardener eventually arrives at the same conclusion. Native plants are not optional, they are the foundation. The reason is ecological rather than aesthetic. Native plants support the insect communities that birds depend on. A 2007 study by University of Delaware researcher Doug Tallamy quantified this gap precisely. Native oaks support over 500 caterpillar species. Non-native ornamentals of comparable size support fewer than 5. Since most songbirds feed their nestlings almost exclusively on caterpillars. Not seeds, not berries, caterpillars. A garden without native plants is a garden that cannot support breeding birds, regardless of how many feeders it has. The practical implication is that feeders attract birds, but native plants retain them. A garden with excellent native plant coverage will have birds year-round. A garden with only feeders will have birds that visit briefly and move on. Native plants also provide food directly. Coneflower seed heads, left standing through winter rather than deadheaded, become foraging stations for goldfinches and sparrows. Native sunflowers, allowed to go to seed, feed dozens of species. American beautyberry produces fruit that attracts birds that wouldn't otherwise visit a typical suburban garden. One commenter described placing spent sunflower heads on the ground. After they expired, the birds picked them clean. The remaining stalks produced more blooms. The garden fed itself. The no-spray commitment is inseparable from the native plant argument. Insecticides don't selectively kill pest insects. They kill insects, including the caterpillars, beetles, and larvae that birds eat. A garden treated with broad-spectrum insecticides will have fewer birds, which means more pest pressure over time, which creates demand for more insecticide. It is a cycle that ends with a chemically dependent garden that has lost its biological pest control entirely. Research on neonicotinoid insecticides has documented significant declines in insectivorous bird populations in treated areas. The mechanism is simple. Remove the food, lose the birds. Feeders, the supplemental layer. Feeders work best as a supplement to habitat, not a substitute for it. That said, when used correctly, they do meaningful work, both in attracting birds and in keeping them from foraging on fruit and vegetables. The seed quality question is more important than most people realize. Generic bird seed mixes are typically built around milo and millet, cheap filler grains that most desirable bird species ignore. The birds that do eat milo and millet are often house sparrows, an invasive species that actively destroys the nests of native cavity nesting birds. The seed that falls to the ground attracts rats. The seed that doesn't fall germinates, producing an unplanned garden of weeds in the area under the feeder. A quality mix built around sunflower hearts, peanuts, safflower, and pumpkin seeds costs more per pound but delivers dramatically better results. Shell-free seed doesn't germinate. Higher fat, higher protein seed supports better bird condition, particularly during breeding season and winter. The birds that come to a quality feeder are the birds you actually want in the garden. The insectivores and seed-eaters that contribute to pest control and biodiversity. The squirrel problem deserves a practical answer. Slim poles are harder to climb than standard posts. Baffles above and below the feeder block most approaches. Capsaicin, red pepper extract on seed-eaters, squirrels, and other mammals effectively. They can taste it. Birds cannot. The capsaicin receptor is simply absent in birds, so the extract has no effect on them while being genuinely unpleasant for everything else. One commenter noted that squirrels can build tolerance to capsaicin over time, which is true. Rotating deterrent methods is more effective than relying on any single one. A note on rats: seed on the ground attracts them. Shell-free seed reduces spillage. Seed catchers under feeders collect what does fall. If rats are already a problem in the area, ground-level feeding of any kind, including tray feeders, should be avoided until the population is under control. Birdhouses, getting the details right. The most common birdhouse mistake is buying a generic decorative house. That doesn't match the specifications of any actual bird species. Entrance hole, diameter, interior floor dimensions, mounting height, and ventilation requirements are all species-specific, and getting them wrong produces a birdhouse that sits empty indefinitely. Resources like NestWatch.org provide exact plans for every cavity nesting species by region. The difference between a correctly specified house and a generic one is the difference between a house that is occupied within a season and one that becomes a wasp nest. Placement is as important as design. Near a compost bin is ideal for wrens and other insectivores. Decomposing organic matter generates a constant supply of flies, beetles, and larvae. 5 to 10 feet off the ground, away from branches that give predators easy access. Facing away from prevailing weather. The birds that nest in a well-placed, correctly specified house will spend the entire breeding season hunting insects within foraging range, which, for most small songbirds, means your garden. Building the system. The garden that birds want to live in has 4 components. Native plants that support insect communities. Reliable water that removes the motivation to damage fruit. Supplemental feeding that attracts and retains specific species. And nesting structure that converts visitors into residents. None of these components works as well in isolation as they do together. Water without cover is underused. Feeders without native plants attract the wrong birds. Birdhouses without nearby foraging habitat sit empty. The system works because the components reinforce each other, each one making the others more effective. The timeline is longer than most gardeners expect. A newly planted garden with a new birdbath and new feeders will see modest bird activity in the first season. By the second or third season, as the plants establish, and the local bird population learns that the garden is reliable, the activity increases substantially. Patience is part of the design. What you end up with, if you build it correctly, is a garden that largely manages its own pest pressure. One where the 10 a.m. birds sweep through the vegetable beds is a daily event, and the spray bottle stays in the shed. What is the bird species that has made the biggest difference in your garden? And what did you do to attract it? I'm building a regional guide and want to hear what is actually working in different climates. Tell me in the comments.